Research is an amazing thing, and one of the reasons why I have never wanted to outsource it to an assistant or to AI is because you discover things in the process of working on it yourself that you would have missed completely if you had some other more directed agent, living or artificial, perusing the piles of incoming, nonsense to look for the nuggets that you need to tell your stories. And one thing that will come up a few times in the course of today's episode are things that I found when I wasn't looking for them. So this week, as I was working on the story for one of this week's Patreon posts, that of the reliever Robert Dean Lee, known as Bob, I came across the passing of Dick Wantz. I leave it to you whether this name makes for a better dirty baseball name than, say, the present-day reliever Richard Dick Lovelady or Johnny Dickshot or any of the other many possibilities. But before we get too worked up over that possibility, let me tell you about Wantz, who pitched for the Angels for precisely one game in 1965. Wantz, who was born around 1940, came and went, sadly, prior to the advent of the amateur draft. He was a Los Angeles area kid who went to high school near Long Beach and to college at Cal State, Los Angeles. He was tall and thin, a 6'5" righty, a bespectacled string bean. He wore glasses because he found he couldn't see while pitching in night games. The Angels signed him in 1961, and he started pitching his way up. They say he had good stuff, but it's hard for me to tell what kind of pitcher he was becoming. He had a .429 ERA in 424 minor league innings with 430 strikeouts and way too many walks, about 5 per 9. That's going to be a bit of a theme today, too many walks. He threw sidearm and mostly worked as a swingman in the Angels system, and nothing about that screams future ace. Still, as we've all had the occasion to observe with pitchers over the years, you never know when they're going to change something or find a new pitch or a new grip, and suddenly you're living in a world where everything you know is wrong. At least everything you know about one Angels reliever is wrong. The Angels pitching coach at that time, Marv Grissom, compared him to Ewell the Whip Blackwell, a very effective pitcher, a sidearmer, a 6-time All-Star with the Reds. No one ever did get to find out whether he was right about that. A spring training article mentioned that Dick's golf handicap was 1. I know nothing about golf, but I understand that's good. Well, he pitched impressively in spring training in 1965 and made the team as a reliever. His major league debut and finale came on April 13th, 1965, opening day at Dodger Stadium. The Angels began their existence at Los Angeles' Little Wrigley Field, where the Pacific Coast League version of the team played, and then moved over to Dodger Stadium and played there from 1962 to 1965, at which time they moved to their present home, the one that later acquired some patented Disney fiberglass rocks during that company's ownership of the club. No one does fake rocks like Disney. A good Star Wars movie, totally beyond them, but fake rocks in a theme park subsection dedicated to Star Wars, you are in like Flynn. By which I mean Weebo Flynn, noted bounty hunter. Surely there's a Weebo Flynn in the mythos somewhere. Similarly, in baseball, there's sometimes a Cleveland team as part of the mythos. Sometimes they write themselves out for decades at a time, but on this particular day, April 13th, 1965, they were playing their opening day game on the road at Dodger Stadium against the Angels, and Dick Wantz came on late in a game that Cleveland was leading 5-0. He struck out his first batter, Max Alvis, then gave up consecutive doubles to Vic Davalillo and Larry Brown, followed by a single to Joe Askew. 2 runs scored before he struck out fellow pitcher Ralph Terry, the former Yankee, and induced Dick Hauser, future Yankees manager, to pop out to short. Manager Bill Rigney replaced him after that, and so Dick's line for the game was 1 inning, 3 hits, 2 runs, no walks, 2 strikeouts, ERA 18 forever, because almost exactly 30 days later he was gone, deceased. His line for the game is also his career line. About a week after the opener, the Angels went on the road, hitting Cleveland, New York, Detroit, and Kansas City. During that trip, before he could pitch again, Wantz started complaining of painful headaches that happened in Detroit. The Angels sent him to be checked out, and the Detroit doctors admitted him to the hospital. He laid there for a week. He seemed okay, I guess, and he was sent home to California to rest. The headaches came back. He was hospitalized again in Inglewood. Tests this time suggested a brain tumor. The surgeons felt they had to go in with the intention of cutting out the offending, the dangerous, the threatening tissue, but they were much too late. There was just too much spread. Wantz never woke up after the surgery, and all things considered, maybe that was a blessing. He left behind a wife, Sandra, and a 5-year-old son. Having learned about Dick Wantz and his sadly brief life and career and tragic end, I wondered if anyone had written much about him, and what I found was passing mentions of him in articles with titles like The Angels' Bad Luck and The Angels' Curse, and then I got mad because I grant you, the Angels may well be cursed, but it isn't a stupid baseball team that had the bad luck. It was Dick Wantz and Sandra Wantz and their kid. They got a pretty raw deal, all things considered, whereas the Angels just went rolling along because it's not a thing that has luck in the sense that people do. It's a business. It has good years and bad. But even that is influenced by the fact that in any given year or period of years, it could be run by people who are smart or people who are dumb. I'll leave it to you to decide which the Angels have had more of. If the Angels sign Albert Pujols and quickly find out that he no longer has feet, he is a footless human being, and that his total lack of functional piggies that went to market has reduced him to the speed of Vaseline running down a driveway. The verb running in this case probably being a contradiction in terms, because it's strictly station to station for both Vaseline and late career Albert Pujols. Is that bad luck or is that bad judgment? It's a little of both, probably. What I mean by that is you get your medical reports prior to signing, and the doctors say, as doctors tend to do, we can't make any promises. But, they should, under most circumstances, hold up for a period of years. And so you sign him to an infinite contract. Well, that's mistake number one, but that's what it's going to take to sign Mr. Pujols at that stage of his life. And then, well, it turns out it's not a period of years, it's a year. Every contract is a gamble that one has to assess in baseball and out, but particularly with long-term baseball contracts, because of the rapidity with which players do tend to fall off. Somebody made a bet about Pujols' arches, and they were wrong. Then there's whatever the heck happened with Anthony Rendon, who signed his name on the dotted line, seemed to literally disintegrate, and didn't seem that bothered by the fact. Angels' curse? No, just Angels' ability to evaluate people or lack thereof. Whether we are talking about player injuries or the sudden demise of a player, that's not a tragedy in the sense that individual people experience things. It's a tragedy for everyone affected, whether family members or teammates or fans, just to the degree which they experience that loss. But the Angels as an entity can't experience that loss because the Angels as an entity is not a human being. I didn't look too closely because I was too disgusted, but I'm certain that some of those articles came out in 2009 after another Angels pitcher, Nick Adenhart, was just flat murdered by a drunk driver. He and 2 others in the car he was in died, and the 4th survived. Although he came extremely close to checking out, his head was no longer connected to his body, and incredibly, doctors were able to put it back, but I imagine, I'm just guessing, that he's had problems for the rest of his life. I do hope he's still around. Adenhart was only 22. Now, whose tragedy was that? Not the Angels, because there's no such animal. There are the people who wear Angels pajamas for a season, a constantly changing cast of people, and they were affected. And again, those of us who are watching and who care were affected, obviously to a much lesser degree than those Angels players were, as they were affected to a lesser degree than the family. But that's all different. And then last, but certainly not least, there was the tragedy that was Adenhart himself, and all the years and experience he was denied by someone else's lack of responsibility. So what does Dick wants? No juvenile joke here. One assumed Dick wanted to live, to pitch, to make love to his wife at least one more time, and watch his kid grow up, and so much more. He wanted anything except what happened to him, anything but to be one more hungry ghost, and ultimately, that tragedy belongs not to a ball club, to him and all the other dispirited spirits haunting the infinite inning. Well, hello there, and welcome back to the show. Infinite Inning number 374 in an ongoing series of missions to the past to better understand the present, the time machine being the game of baseball. I am, as ever, your congenial host, Stephen Goldman, writer, raconteur, podcast host for this journey. How do you keep things fresh for yourself after 374 episodes? Well, as I was beginning the show just now, I thought to myself, what if we add harmonies? Let's try that again. Well, hello there and welcome. Bad idea, right? Doesn't really add anything. Probably subtracts to a great extent. How are you today? I hope you are not subtracted in any sense, but are constantly adding, perhaps not to your waistline, but to your IQ, to your fund of knowledge, to the things that bring you joy in life just by knowing about them. That's a lot of what this here program is devoted to. Now, some of the topics that we tend to discuss around here, including the one that we just left behind, may seem to contradict that, the idea that we're in pursuit of joy. But here's the thing, that sometimes knowing about it, a tragedy, and knowing that you're thinking about it in a way that progresses your understanding of the world or yourself or the people around you, even though it is painful or frightening to know about, the fact that you can feel yourself growing through the process of doing it, that is a joyful experience. It is counterintuitive, but it is true, and it's why we can't allow ourselves the luxury of ducking things which are difficult for us to experience or to cope with, because we are refined by the process of working through those difficult things. And on the subject of difficult things, Nick Adenhart's murderer was sentenced to 51 years to life. I think he'll be eligible for parole somewhere in the 2050s. It can't come too late. This 23-year-old or then 23-year-old Satan spawn was, at the moment he ran a red light and ended 3 lives and permanently altered a 4th, not only lit beyond all measurement, he was on probation for a previous drunk driving conviction. I've never understood why it is that we've never regarded cars in the same way that we regard other power tools. I'm sure there are people in this world who think nothing of tying one on and then pulling out their logging saw or their nail gun. But I'd think most of us, even those of us who have only had 1 or 2 shop classes at most, would think twice before doing that. I mean, that pretty much describes me. Just a couple of classes, I think more or less mandatory in junior high, and I didn't really learn the skills to build anything, but I sure as heck learned all the myriad ways I could lose an eye or a finger, and I certainly heard don't drink and drive often enough, whether in school driving classes, class, singular, or just in public service ads, or observing in life what happens to people who do quite often. But somehow, whereas the lesson adheres with chainsaws, it doesn't seem to adhere with cars. One reason for that is, I guess people don't always have a strong sense of how inebriated they truly are. And I will grant you that. But this guy, and many people like him, the criminal that we were just talking about, Satan's dumber brother, he got sent a message, right? I don't know the circumstances of his original DWI, but if you got away with it in the sense that you didn't hurt yourself and you didn't hurt anybody else, and I assume that was the case because he was back out on the street, you might take it as a hint and a half not to go back in a bar, not to do a lot of drinking. And even if you do fail those first two checks, you know better than to get behind the wheel of a car because you already proved to yourself, and the law, that you have the capacity to misjudge, well, your capacity. It would behoove all of us who drive, whether we drink or not, to think when we get inside the car, yeah, shoot, I should have left earlier. I'm late for that doctor's appointment. I'm late to meet Brenda, and she gets so mad about that stuff. I'm late to pick up my kid from school. I'm late to pick up the dry cleaning or the takeout. Just anything. Just say, yeah, okay, I messed up. But this is not merely a multi-ton roller skate that transports me from point A to point B, but a piece of dangerous heavy machinery that can hurt people, and therefore I need to utilize it carefully and responsibly, both for myself and for my community. But of course, we don't believe in community anymore. We only believe in the self, and I guess we're free to negate that, the self I mean, through, well, really dumb acts of self-harm, and it doesn't matter how many people we take with us when we do it. Because we're all narcissists. No one exists but us. Do I sound like I'm in a mood? I'm not in a mood. I'm very happy to be back with you again this week. It's one of the best things that I get to do, and frankly, the alternatives are pretty terrible. I mean, who else would I spend time with? Alone? With myself? Have you met me? I'm no fun at all. And I'm rather frustrated with that guy at the moment because it turns out I'm going to have to undergo, most likely, yet another procedure to clean out some kidney stones that are threatening to blow me up like a blocked fire hydrant. I feel fine right now. Those of you who have had the experience of kidney stones heard me say that and went, but honestly, it's not like that right now. I mean, if you've had an acute case, you'll never forget it. And I've had way too many. I just have a propensity for this. Ever since I turned 30, it was like a clock went towards midnight. And some aspect of my body chemistry flipped and I just manufactured the things. I hope that's not too much information. But in this case, it's just sitting there. It only bothers me intermittently, and when it does, it's been manageable with a little over-the-counter painkiller like Tylenol. The threat, of course, is that might change at any moment, and so I'm kind of under pressure to make a decision. I hope it resolves on its own. But for now, that's the only kind of pressure I'm under, and I hope to stay that way and not spend any more time on the IL than I have to. I should mention before we move on that this week at Baseball Prospectus, I wrote about Munetaka Murakami of the White Sox and how he has 14 home runs but only one double, at least heading into Friday night's action, and the why of that, including a flashback to 1931 when Earl Webb knocked 67 two-baggers for a dead-end Red Sox team. I hope you'll check it out. In writing it, I was kind of amused because, as you know, just as I do here, I always include a lot of asides and sidelights where relevant, where I think that they add something. Part of the discipline of writing is knowing when you can get away with that and when you should get the heck out of the way of the story. And I hope that I make the right decision the vast majority of the time. In writing about that story, I mentioned in terms of baseball in 1919 and 1920, the ragtime period, I said that this is what passed for fun back then, doubles and petting parties. I wondered if petting parties would make it past my editors because it sounds a little risque, and it was 100 years ago or more that was a thing, and who knows what that is anymore. But I wanted to go over this with you for two reasons. First of all, because if you're along on the ride at the Infinite Inning, you know that our mission here is in part to observe as many obscure, antiquated anachronisms as we can and demystify them. And secondly, this turned into another thing, another gift of research that I didn't anticipate finding as I worked on this episode. So if you don't know, and maybe you do, but they didn't cover this, at least in my high school history classes, or well, no, they did sort of cover it in one college history class. Petting parties resulted from a kind of evolution in mores that took place in the 1920s, where young people said, hey, you know, there might be a kind of middle ground between total abstinence, which is what our folks say we should do, and full-on premarital intercourse, which is dangerous on a number of levels. And it wasn't only men who thought of this. It was the ladies deciding that this was something that was acceptable to do as well. And part of that came from another evolution, which was the development of dating, which was different from courting. If a guy and gal were courting, they were sort of pre-married, whereas the date could happen between any two people. And you might want to make out a little. and even then there were strict speed and frequency limits on this sort of activity. The other guys and girls might shame you if they thought you were moving too fast, too often, and with too many partners. A petting party connoted nothing like an orgy, but was just maybe a darkened room where people on separate couches could safely snuggle a bit without judgment. Snuggle pupping, they might have called it. Well, at least one of them called it. Later, we had drive-in movies, and then you might get up to the same sort of thing, as Paul McCartney once sang, in the backseat of your car. And as I was working up part of the story in the second act of the show, I was reading through some newspaper stories from Detroit in early 1925, and I came across reports of a policeman being shot to death, unfortunately, again, over 100 years ago now, along a lover's lane somewhere in the Detroit area. The car, even before drive-in movies, made it possible for a couple to have a little privacy. If you think about it, it's kind of a portable room. And that was if they parked somewhere a little isolated, a little dark. Well, it turned out thieves had figured this out too, and anticipating, sadly, the Zodiac killer of late 60s San Francisco, they were surprising couples in mid-clinch and robbing them. The unfortunate police officer was trying to catch them in the act. The thieves, not the couples, although I guess the latter was necessary for success with the former. And I guess he did, but they shot first and he didn't make it. So maybe the grown-ups were right and premarital sex was something to be avoided. This all happened on one of the biggest days of Ty Cobb's career, and I'll talk about that a little later in our time together. Before I yield to the onrushing break, I should mention that the Dead Player of the Day series goes on at Patreon. I had a rough week because of the aforementioned medical stuff and also some exterior deadlines that I could not put off. I posted 3 players this week. They included the Hall of Famer Ryne Sandberg, who left us far too recently, the catcher Raleigh Hemsley, who has been the subject of an episode of this show, and a pitcher I just mentioned right at the beginning of things today, Bob Lee. I was not terribly familiar with Lee. He was a very good reliever for the Angels for a couple of years, and then, like many relievers, he wasn't. And I tell the story of why, but also I titled that one Love in a Bullpen Car, at least I think I titled it something of that nature. Remember what I just said a moment ago about drive-in movies and portable rooms? Yeah, Bob Lee was pretty creative with that. I'm up to, I think, number 69, no giggling. So 31 to go in this particular series, and then we'll make some kind of choice among ourselves about what we get up to for members next. And along those lines, I asked last week, and well, the week before, for new subscribers, and a couple of you came forward. So I want to thank you both, Ken and Joe. I'm very grateful. And I will be in touch with both of you regarding a signed book, if a book you so desire. I suppose it doesn't have to be one of mine. I have a few doubles of things. You want one of my copies of I, Robot? It's a really good book. It's not much of a baseball book. My books are much better baseball books than I, Robot, but I, Robot is a great robot book compared to my baseball books. See how that works? I don't recall if Asimov wrote much about baseball. Ray Bradbury wrote a couple of times about baseball, at least. They were more sentimental stories than science fiction, but let us not go off on another tangent because I do have to get out of the way of this break. On the other side, I want to talk about some anniversaries, one kind of positive, one negative, and they're not exact anniversaries, but approximate. One of them, kind of important in my opinion, is coming up next year, and I wanted to get ahead of it. And so indeed, we will get ahead of it together just behind this break. I'll see you on the other side. So here are 2 mostly disconnected thoughts centered on the 1920s, but with resonance for today. It's been, in both cases, about 100 years, and in one case, it's 100 years, yay! And in the other, it's 100 years, God. Let me start with the yay. Next year, 2027, it will have been 100 years since the brief life of one of the greatest teams of all time, the 1927 Yankees. Brief because they all only run for 1 year. The Yankees, as you know, went 110, 44, and 1, 40 in the World Series. Babe Ruth hit 60 home runs. That Lou Gehrig guy was pretty good too. And they had a very, very deep pitching staff with really no soft spots. Not that they needed more than basically the top 5 pitchers at any point in time. Although we're going to talk about some people who were on the opposite end of the pitching staff. I found myself wondering what, if anything, baseball or the Yankees might do to celebrate that 100th anniversary. I feel like this is perhaps the first team in all of baseball that you would observe the 100th anniversary for because it still has relevance. There have been pennant winners and championship teams going back to the 1880s. And those of us who really love and really know baseball might observe and fondly talk about the Tinker Evers Chance Cubs or the $100,000 infield A's or the Red Sox championship teams of the 1910s, but these clubs aren't remembered by the larger culture. And I'll tell you one huge round-bellied reason for that was Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth came around at exactly the same moment as mass media did. We were in a high literacy age. There was a newspaper, a daily, in some cities for every man, woman, and child could have their own bespoke daily, basically. And radio was just starting its advent. There were movies, of course, in which Ruth appeared, whether we're talking about newsreels or the attempt, sort of anticipating Elvis, to take him from the medium in which he had succeeded, baseball, and translate him to another. Films didn't quite work in his case. Didn't totally work in Elvis's case. Although Elvis, not bad, it was the vehicles that were weak. So for the first time, it was possible to become not just a regional star, but discoverable by everybody, and simultaneously for the media to put you under a microscope so everyone could see you really close up, the good parts and the bad. And as you know, Ruth supplied a lot of both. In short, he transcended baseball and changed the nature of athletic stardom. And along with him, the potential of baseball itself changed. It went from this regional theatrical attraction to big dollar entertainment, just like the movies did at almost exactly the same time. The 1927 Yankees weren't the first championship team in Yankees history. They were the second, but we don't remember the 1923 team with the same awe, in part because it wasn't as good a team. It wasn't a dominant team. It wasn't Murderers Row. Gehrig had just come up at the end of the year. That was a Wally Pipp at first base team. Nothing against Wally Pipp, a good player, but not Lou Gehrig. The magic wasn't the same. Ruth needed more time to work that magic on the culture. And so you have the combination of his apotheosis, 60 home runs, and Murderers Row, and 110 wins and a championship. Now that I think about it, I guess people still remember the 1919 White Sox and Reds, but not for reasons you would want to celebrate. Compare and contrast our culture to that which produced them? Yeah, sure, but not celebrate. Having considered the possibility that there should be a 100th anniversary celebration of the Murderers Row Yankees, I wondered what would you do for such a celebration? Besides the inevitable t-shirt or bobblehead giveaway, I mean. And that question brought me to the rather morbid thought that it was soon after 1927 that you would start noticing empty seats at any reunion of that club. It must have been obvious as early as Lou Gehrig Day in 1939, which was a reunion of the 1927 Yankees, or was also that. Of course, the day is remembered more for Gehrig's speech for obvious reasons, but the 27 Yankees guys were there too, hence the oft-reprinted photo of Ruth hugging Lou. Note that Lou did not hug back. Consider that. Urban Shocker's chronic heart disease killed him at 37 years old in 1928, not even a year after the World Series. Manager Miller Huggins dropped from a skin infection that went whole body bacterial in 1929. He was 51. Gehrig came next in 1941. He was 37. Johnny Grabowski, the opening day catcher, and part of an even-odd catching platoon with Pat Collins until he got hurt in July, he made it only to 46 years old in 1946 because, all right, you know how a couple of shows back I talked about the Yankees pitching prospect Russ Van Atta, who came along, I guess, about 4 or 5 years later, who permanently damaged his pitching hand while rescuing his dog from a house fire. You might recall that as someone who loves animals, I said I was glad that Van Atta saved the pooch, even though we're taught from a very young age, get out, don't stop, don't grab your coat or the cat or the dog, just run. Yeah, I know that that's good advice, but I was happy for the dog. Grabowski was in the same position as Van Atta, except it wasn't his dog, it was his car. Judgment, Johnny Grabowski. He lived in the town of Guilderland, New York, outside of Albany. Early on May 19th, 1946, he and his wife, Lorraine, were awoken by the smell of smoke. It turned out the house was on fire. They succeeded in getting out, but the fire, which had started downstairs, maybe in the living room, maybe in the kitchen, must have already been out of hand because in getting out, Mrs. Grabowski suffered burns on her shoulders, hands, and one of her feet. So they're out, but then Grabowski decided he'd better go into the garage and save the car. I do not rank the car with the dog, with Rover. Rover is a family friend, a member of the family, but the car is just, again, a tool, a weapon in some cases, but mostly just a tool, and I know they can be expensive and a big setback if you lose yours, but it's your life, man. He suffered first and second degree burns on his back, face, hands, arms, and feet. He lingered for 4 days and passed away. For the Chrysler, don't do that. That same year, Tony Lazzari had either an epileptic seizure or a heart attack or both at an inopportune moment because he was both home alone and standing at the top of the stairs. That did not end well for him. In fact, it ended in about the worst way possible. 2 years later, Herb Pennock, by then general manager of the Phillies, suffered a fatal stroke brought on by the exertion of pushing through a revolving door at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York. They must have had heavy doors. And Babe Ruth also passed in 1948. Throat cancer. He was only 53. Pennock was about the same age. Look, we've all seen the pictures. We've heard the recordings of Babe Ruth's final appearances. The only game in the world, I believe, is baseball. We've heard how bad he sounded. He acknowledged how bad his throat sounded. He was one of the first people ever to receive treatments for cancer like chemotherapy. And yet, I know this is weird, but I have a hard time accepting that someone who loved life as much as Babe Ruth did ever died. And that's not it. That's not what I mean. I accept that he, like all of us, had his time to go, but that he was humbled in that way, that he was whittled down, as he called it, by termites, is just hard to accept. It's like an equal and opposite reaction to his entire life. And he had kind of earned that life. As much as people said he was out of control, I think he kind of deserved to be out of control in some ways. Perhaps this was the price of the way he had lived up to a certain point, certainly up to the point that he married Claire. But it just seems so unjust to me, and I know that's not the way that the world works. It's not unjust, it's just random. And that, too, is hard to accept. There were only 26 1927 Yankees. 21 years later, more than a quarter of them had moved on to the next stage of existence. It's hard to believe that the Babe, Lou, Lazzari, Hug, Herb Pennock, and a good catcher, John Grabowski, have all passed on, Bob Musial said in 1950. Fate was good to us in the old days, but it has given us a few cruel belts in later years. It is hard to understand how big and powerful men like Ruth and Gehrig were among the first to go. 2 other 27 Yankees left the hotel before their 60th birthdays, the fringe pitchers Joe Giard and Walter Beal. Beal was a right-hander who the Yankees tried to establish for several years in the mid-20s. He had a notable curve, but he couldn't land it in the strike zone. In 124 innings, he walked 111 batters. That's 8.1 per 9. Maybe there's an element of Greek tragedy in there. I don't know, but the gods granted him a curveball with a crazy hard break, an impossible break, a break that no batter can follow, but the trade-off is he could never throw it for a strike. Would you rather be that guy, Bialacles, or Oedipus? I know the Oedipus thing makes a lot of people squeamish, but at least he could find the strike zone every once in a while, right? Maybe? In 1924, Miller Huggins said, "Beal has a fine curveball and he is just wild enough to be effective." Wrong. Well, let me clarify that a little bit. Beal's career ERA was .443, which wasn't that bad in context. With all that wildness, he could be pretty hard to hit. On the other hand, you didn't have to hit him. He pitched in 28 bases-loaded situations in his career and walked the next batter 8 times, which is a crazy high percentage. It's also a small sample in part because it was so crazy. Now, it's also era-dependent, because there have been times in baseball history that pitchers just walked a lot of guys and teams tolerated it. In part, it was just their approach to be home run avoidant, or the way that the strike zone was called at that time, or both. But to put this in some kind of context, Mitch Wild Thing Williams, Rangers and Phillies closer, walked 7.1 per 9 in his career and struck out 8.6. Beal, in a far more contact-oriented era, was at 8.1 and 6.2. Mitch, in his career, faced 175 batters with the bases loaded and walked 27 of them. That's 15.4%. Beal's 8 out of 28 is 28.6%. Only Dick Wyke, who jounced around the American League in the late 40s, was worse. I mean, in the whole history of baseball, he faced 49 batters with the bases loaded and walked 16 of them, which is to say about a third. On the plus side, he never allowed a grand slam. How could he? Beal got just 1 inning in 1927. The Yankees just had too many other good pitchers to give him much time. He spent most of the season walking 90 batters in 107 innings at places like St. Paul and Hartford. Congestive heart failure got him in 1959 when he was only 59 years old. What went for Beal also applied to another wild arm, lefty Joe Giard. He worked a lot in comparison, 27 whole innings. He walked 19. I can't decide if his name reminds me more of Joe Girardi or Joe Giardi, who would be, I guess, a mascot for intestinal parasites. He came to the Yankees with the best of intentions. I mean, the organization had the best of intentions when they acquired him. In February of 1927, the Yankees dealt slumping former 20-game winner Sad Sam Jones to the Browns in return for outfielder Cedric Durst, a non-hitting outfielder, and Giard, a non-pitching pitcher. Of course, they didn't know all of that at the time, although it seems like Durst and Giard had given them a big clue in their records with the Browns, which were very poor. Huggins thought Durst had potential as a bench bat. As for Giard, he said, "He was the man I wanted most. Both my left-handers are aging, and you never can tell when they will crack. What I needed was a young southpaw who is coming instead of going." He wasn't wrong. He was referring to Herb Pennock, then 33 and a holdout, and Dutch Ruther, also 33. Both were very good in 1927, but Ruther drank and the Yankees dropped him after the season. And as for Pennock, he had one more good year, and then his arm went. He still had great control, but from 35 to his retirement at 40, he posted a 4.48 ERA. His career ERA to that point was 3.35. It was a high offense time, but this is sort of the flip side of being wild. You can be around the strike zone all the time and get hit hard if you're no longer capable of fooling the batter. So Huggins wasn't wrong about the team's need, but he was incorrect that Pico Giard, as they called him, could be one of the people to remedy it. He was 28 and joined the Yankees with a 5.74 ERA in 250 and 2/3 innings. Huggins must have thought, well, you get him away from the Browns, from their tiny ballpark, and coach him up. It just didn't happen. His 1927 ERA was 8 even. He never pitched in the majors again. He departed this vale of tears in 1956 at 57 years old. I don't know what got him. If he did something foolish involving a burning Chevy, he seems to have lived mostly a solitary life, so maybe no one knows. Here's a fun bit of trivia regarding Joe Giard. Name a Browns pitcher who held Ty Cobb to a double and considered it a victory. You guessed it, that was Joe Giard, and I will tell you what happened between him and Cobb on May 5th, 1925, right after this second and final break of the episode. Hang in there, won't you? A very brief digression involving a pitcher very different from Joe Giard, but just a little while ago I took a break and checked out Jacob Misiorowski pitching against the Yankees, and it's just so novel to watch a guy throwing 103, 104 pitch after pitch The Yankees were just helpless because he was locating it well too, and his slider was also working. He was just unhittable. And I know this makes me sound like a well in my day grandpa, but I come across this sort of thing working on this show all the time. Not so much in the period we've been discussing tonight, the 1920s, because radar guns weren't available yet. But once they were, you'll see things like the Twins have a really good prospect this year. He throws hard, a consistent 88 miles an hour. Today, if a kid throws 88 miles an hour, they pat him on the head and say, "You'd better stay back and finish your degree, lad." "But sir, you haven't seen my knuckleball yet." "Don't call us, Charlie. We'll call you." I think I'd enjoy doing the rest of the show in Charlie's voice, but I'm not sure you would. I'm pretty sure you wouldn't, so I'm not going to attempt that. So May 5th, 1925, the Tigers visited the Browns. Cobb batted third. Cobb was an all-fields hitter who did a lot of going the other way. That's how you hit .367 lifetime. As you know, he wasn't a power hitter in the modern sense. He ran out a lot of extra base hits, but he wasn't trying to hit the ball for distance. He came up in 1905. The dead ball was in play until 1920, so there wouldn't have been much profit in his trying to pull the ball in the air. Then things changed, but he didn't. He was already in his 30s. His approach still worked, whether the ball was as soft as a sponge or hard as a coconut, or my head. And he liked the way he played. He liked that style of baseball, and it worked for him, so fair enough. But it vexed him that people said he couldn't do it the other way. So, just for that one day, for one day only, just to be annoying about things, he decided to be a Babe Ruth-style pull hitter. In the first inning, he hit a home run off of Bullet Joe Bush. In the second, he hit another off of Elam Van Gilder. And in the third, he hit one off of Milt Gaston. That one flew clear out of the ballpark. All three were pulled to right field. In between, he had 3 other hits, going 6 for 6 on the day, and in the process set a since broken record for single bases in a single game. One of those other hits, one of the non-homers, was a double off of Giard. When Cobb came out for his last at-bat, the crowd cheered, shouting things like, "Hit another one!" He turned to the stands, doffed his cap, and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I've been coming to this ballpark for 21 seasons, and this is the first time in my long experience that a St. Louis crowd has ever appreciated me. I sincerely thank you." Joe Giard was part of giving Ty Cobb that moment of pleasure in a life that had too few of them. Now, on the other end of the actuary table for the 1927 Yankees, Bob Shockey, Jumping Joe Dugan, Waite Hoyt, George Pipgrass, the utility infielder Ray Morehart, and shortstop Mark Koenig were around into the 80s. Actually, Koenig was around longer than that. He made it to 1993, and I recall a couple of times I heard him interviewed on the radio. Shockey lived until he was 90. I feel like we've mentioned this quite a bit over the run of the show, long enough for him to show up for the opening of the rebuilt Yankee Stadium in 1976. 33 years after Koenig left the planet, there's no one left. I wish baseball or the Yankees would commission a speech to be read by an actor or actress with a great voice, something evocative of the era and the importance of the team, and not just give away cheap merchandise, but I imagine I'll be disappointed. And speaking of disappointment, here is the other 100-year-old item that I mentioned earlier. I'm not going to make a big deal out of this, in part because it's late in our hour together, but earlier this week, I was reading some of the works of W.O. McGeehan, Bill McGeehan, for many years a columnist and sports editor for the New York Herald Tribune. He's been gone a long time now, and I suppose he's mostly forgotten. Most sports writers are as soon as they're out of business one way or the other, but the guy could write. He was deeply engaged with baseball and was close friends with Dodgers manager Wilbert Robinson and Yankees co-owner for a time, Till Houston, the man who built Yankee Stadium, and then allowed himself to be bought out by his partner, Jacob Ruppert, who we talked about extensively last show, the show before, pretty recently. You might recall that Robinson and Houston co-owned a hunting retreat, Dover Hall in Brunswick, Georgia. McGeehan visited quite often, and he was there with Uncle Robbie and Colonel Houston around Thanksgiving in 1933 when his heart gave out. And his wife, noted playwright Sophie Treadwell, pretty much buried him right on the spot. And so in a sense, he's still at Dover Hall. I stumbled on this column he published on July 9th, 1925. I'll give you just a taste of it, see if you can anticipate why it resonated with me. Mr. John Joseph McGraw, the manager of the Giants that is, peering into the future with a prophetic eye, sees the time coming when material for professional baseball will be imported from France and England. This is reassuring because it has become apparent that the available supply of ivory for the national pastime has been running very low in this country. Indifferent material for the game has been held at prohibitive figures. Lest Colonel Jacob Rupert and the other owners of baseball clubs should dispatch their scouts to the old world prematurely, I must add that Mr. McGraw feels that this will be a gradual development, and that it may take a decade or two before Europe will be producing ivory worth purchasing. However, it might be just as well to prepare the ivory hunters for transatlantic travel. The home ivory sources seem to have been worked out. Some of our far-sighted citizens will view this development with considerable alarm. I understand that some of our congressmen already have been approached and urged to introduce a bill providing for a high tariff on imported ivory in order that the native sources can be protected. Many of our colleges, like Holy Cross and Fordham, specialize in developing players for the big leagues. There is some danger that the attendance at these colleges might fall off when it became evident that they would have to compete with foreign sources for the development of ivory. According to Mr. McGraw's prediction, the roster of the Giants about 20 years from now will read something like this: Deschamps, first base, France; Tulkinghorn Jones, second base, England; McTavish, third base, Scotland; Limburger, shortstop, Germany; Ivanovic, left field, Russia; Savernsky, center field, Hungary; Umslapagas, right field, Zululand; Eisenberg, catcher, Lithuania; Alvarado, pitcher, Spain. It may be hard to get wildly enthusiastic over a team of this composition in a World Series, yet it might be done. The favorite son of the old home team at Detroit is Ty Cobb of Atlanta, Georgia. Cleveland's favorite hometown boy is Tris Speaker of Hubbard, Texas. Washington's native son is Walter Johnson of Iola, Kansas. The favorite son of New York, in a baseball way, is Babe Ruth of Baltimore, Maryland. Oh well, baseball rises superior to a little matter of geography. Well, yeah, but it doesn't rise superior to politics and bigotry. McKeon wrote that just over a year after Congress passed and President Calvin Coolidge signed the Immigration Act of 1924, championed by xenophobes, racists, anti-Semites, the Klan, and eugenicists, the act set up restrictive quotas on immigration from Eastern and Southern Europe and banned it from places like Japan and China altogether. This law was in effect until the 1950s. Among many other things, the law helped sour relations with Japan, which justly felt discriminated against, just one of many small steps on the road to war in the Pacific in 1941, and when the Holocaust happened, it prevented the rescue or gave cover to those who did not want to rescue anything like the morally required number of potential victims who, while failing rescue, died. Sorry, wrong word, not died, were murdered. McKeon wrote a good piece, a funny piece, and he couldn't have known what would happen. He was long dead by the time the consequences kicked in, but he well knew that Hungarians were effectively banned, Lithuanians were mostly banned, Spaniards largely banned, and he surely knew that a mention of Zululand, that is the then British possession in Africa, that was just a bad taste joke. Umslapagas was a black character created by British adventure writer H. Rider Haggard, the creator of Alan Quatermain. Umslapagas wasn't welcome. He wasn't coming, and if he had come, he wouldn't have been allowed to play. Again, 1924 law, much older prejudices, 1925 column, 2026 us, playing the same old games. Never change, America. I mean, you don't anyway. We're living in the world not that cried wolf but denied it. These are the stories of my soul. For other stories, ones that I might choose to share on social media, you can follow me at stephengoldman.bsky.social. You can also write us, by which I mean me, at infiniteinning@gmail.com. And there's a Facebook group. Simply go to Facebook, search on Infinite Inning, bang, you're there. No feet. That hasn't come up in a while. Maybe they got the feet under control. Should you wish to support the show, and I very much hope you do, please visit patreon.com/theinfiniteinning. As I said earlier, the Dead Player of the Day series goes on. Gear of a rudimentary kind available at the-infinite-inning.creator-spring.com. Original soundtrack available gratis at casualobservermusic.bandcamp.com. Finally, should you find yourself with the proverbial moment to spare, please go to the podcatcher of your choice and rate, review, and subscribe. And if your podcatcher doesn't let you do those things, give up pancakes for a month in protest. That will leave more pancakes for the rest of us, and I hear there's a shortage. Pancakes are shipped through the Straits of Hormuz, right? Our theme song, which you are hearing now and have been listening to throughout the episode, was a co-composition of myself and Dr. Rick Mooring, who says, well, if I can just get Dr. Rick some Gas X to clear that up, I'll be back next week with more tales from inside the Infinite Inning.